Story number 1. The empty chair. I never thought that a simple family tradition could unravel the fabric of our lives. But that December in 1990 proved me utterly wrong. Growing up in the quaint village of Elmwood in England, Christmas was always a time of warmth, laughter, and togetherness. Our family was no exception, and every year, my parents hosted a grand Christmas dinner that brought together relatives from near and far. But this year, something was different. Something sinister lurking in the shadows of our cherished tradition. The Whitaker family had always been the heart of Elmwood. My grandfather, Edward Whitaker, was a beloved patriarch who had passed away 5 years earlier. Despite his absence, his memory was kept alive through stories, photographs, and, most notably, the tradition of leaving one chair empty at every Christmas dinner, a gesture of respect and remembrance. I was 16, on the cusp of adulthood, and this year's dinner held a particular significance for me. My older brother, James, was getting married the following spring, and our parents wanted everything to be perfect. As I helped my mother prepare the feast in the sprawling kitchen, the aroma of roasted turkey, spiced cider, and freshly baked pies filled the air, creating an inviting atmosphere that belied the unease that would soon descend upon us. The dining room was adorned with festive decorations, garlands of evergreen, twinkling lights, and a magnificent Christmas tree that stood proudly in the corner, its branches heavy with ornaments and sparkling tinsel. At the head of the table, where Grandfather Edward's seat usually resided, there was a solitary empty chair draped in a fine lace cloth. A small photo of him placed delicately on the seat. As relatives began to arrive, the room buzzed with excitement and chatter. Cousins laughed, aunts shared stories, and uncles recounted tales of Christmases past. The atmosphere was joyful, a testament to the Whitaker family's enduring bond. But as the evening wore on, an undercurrent of tension began to weave itself into the festivities. It started subtly, during dessert, as we savored rich plum puddings and sipped on steaming cups of tea. I noticed my cousin Lily casting frequent glances toward the empty chair. "Grandpa Edward always loved being part of our dinners," she remarked with a wistful smile. "It's not the same without him." James, ever the skeptic, chuckled. "Come on, Lily. Grandpa would be happy seeing us all together." But Lily's eyes held a flicker of something else, something unspoken. As the night deepened and the fire crackled in the hearth, the room seemed to grow colder, the shadows lengthening and dancing along the walls. It was during the final course of our meal that the true unease began to manifest. We were all seated, plates nearly empty, when a sudden, sharp chill swept through the room. The lights flickered, casting eerie patterns of light and dark across the table. The cheerful music from the radio stuttered and died, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. It was then that a soft sigh echoed through the room, a barely audible sound that seemed to emanate from the empty chair. "Did you hear that?" whispered my Aunt Margaret, her hand instinctively reaching for mine. "Probably just the wind," my father replied, trying to maintain a semblance of calm. "It's a bit drafty tonight." But the sounds didn't stop. Another sigh, followed by the distinct clinking of a spoon against a glass, echoed through the room. The family exchanged uneasy glances, the jovial atmosphere now thick with apprehension. "Maybe someone moved the chair," suggested my Uncle Henry, though his voice lacked conviction. "I don't think so," my mother said softly. "Grandpa Edward never moved his chair." The room seemed to grow colder still, the fire's warmth failing to dispel the creeping dread that settled over us. My heart pounded in my chest as the sounds continued: soft sighs, the gentle clink of silverware, and an almost imperceptible whispering that seemed to come from all around us. "Someone's here," I muttered under my breath, my eyes darting nervously around the room. Before anyone could respond, the room plunged into darkness. The power had gone out, leaving us bathed in the dim glow of candlelight that flickered uneasily. Panic began to rise as the sounds grew louder, more insistent, The whispers turned into muffled voices, indistinct yet filled with sorrow and longing. "Grandpa Edward," a voice called out, barely audible over the cacophony of whispers. I froze, the name hitting me like a physical blow. My father's hand tightened around mine, his knuckles whitening. "Everyone, stay calm," he urged, though his voice wavered slightly. Suddenly, the empty chair began to move, creaked as if someone were shifting their weight, the lace cloth rustling softly. The room held its breath, the family too terrified to react as the chair slowly pulled back, as if inviting an unseen presence to join us. The whispers intensified, growing louder and more frantic. "Join us," they seemed to implore, the voices overlapping in a dissonant symphony of despair. A piercing shriek shattered the tension, causing everyone to jump. The lights flickered back on, and for a split second, the room was bathed in bright light. But when my eyes adjusted, the chair was once again empty, and the whispers had faded into an unsettling silence. "Did anyone see that?" I asked, my voice trembling. No one responded, too stunned to speak. We sat in tense silence, the weight of what had just transpired hanging heavily in the air. My brother James finally broke the silence, his face pale. "Maybe we should call it a night," he suggested, though his voice lacked its usual bravado. As we began to clear the table, the atmosphere remained thick with unease. No one dared to discuss what had happened, each person lost in their own thoughts and fears. We retired to the living room, the laughter and warmth of earlier now replaced by a cold, oppressive stillness. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that Grandfather Edward's spirit lingered, unable to find peace. Sleep eluded me as I lay in bed, the events of the evening replaying in my mind like a never-ending nightmare. The next morning, the house was quiet, the horrors of the previous night seeming almost surreal. Over breakfast, the family tentatively began to discuss what had happened. Lily was visibly shaken, her eyes haunted. "I felt him there," she confessed. "I could sense his presence." My father sighed, rubbing his temples. "Perhaps it's time we let go. Accept that he's gone." But Lily shook her head. "I don't think he wants to be forgotten. Maybe we need to do something to help him rest." As the day progressed, we sought answers, delving into old family records and speaking with relatives who remembered Grandfather Edward well. It was my grandmother who provided the most insight, her eyes distant as she recounted stories of Edward's unwavering dedication to our family and his deep love for Christmas. "He was a devout man," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Christmas was his favorite time of year. He believed in the spirit of giving and the importance of family. Losing him was devastating for all of us." Armed with this knowledge, we decided to honor his memory in a more profound way. That evening, we returned to the dining room, determined to perform a small ceremony to help ease his restless spirit. Candles were lit, a photo of Edward was placed back on the empty chair, and we gathered around, holding hands in a circle of unity and love. "Grandfather Edward," my mother began, her voice steady, "we remember you today with love and gratitude. Please find peace, knowing that your legacy lives on in each of us." As we spoke the words, a sense of calm began to wash over the room. The air grew warmer, the oppressive cold lifting as if in response to our heartfelt plea. The whispers returned, but this time, they were gentle, almost comforting. "Thank you," they seemed to say, before fading into silence. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of closure, a belief that Edward had finally found peace. The empty chair no longer felt like a haunting presence, but a cherished memory that bound us together. That Christmas, the Whitaker family found solace in our shared experience, our bond strengthened by the supernatural ordeal we had endured. We knew that Grandpa Edward's spirit would always be a part of our celebrations. But now, it was a presence of love and remembrance rather than fear. Years have passed since that fateful Christmas, and the memory of that night still lingers, a reminder of the thin line between the living and the dead. Every year, we leave an empty chair at our dinner table, not out of obligation, but as a symbol of the enduring love that connects us across the realms of life and death. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the faint sound of clinking glasses and soft whispers, a comforting reminder that Grandpa Edward is still with us, watching over our family and ensuring that the spirit of Christmas remains alive in our hearts. And as I sit alone during the quiet hours of the night, I can't help but feel grateful for the haunting presence that taught us the true meaning of family, love, and the unbreakable bonds that transcend even death itself. Story number 2. The Uninvited Guest. I still wake up every Christmas morning with a chill running down my spine, even though the holiday has been a part of my family's traditions longer than I can remember. It's 2013, and this year's Christmas in our small Ohio town has already taken a turn that no one could have anticipated. Our house, an old Victorian with creaky floors and stained glass windows, had always been the centerpiece of our neighborhood's holiday spirit. Every year, my parents hosted a grand Christmas dinner, inviting relatives and close friends to share in the festivities. It was a time of joy, laughter, and the comforting aroma of my mother's famous roast turkey. But this year, something felt different from the moment I stepped through the front door. It was the morning of Christmas Day. I woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside my window, the sunlight filtering through the curtains and casting warm patterns on my bedroom floor. I stretched, feeling a rare sense of peace. Downstairs, the smell of cinnamon and pine filled the air, mingling with the scent of freshly brewed coffee. I grabbed a quick breakfast before heading to the living room, where the rest of the family was already bustling about, putting the finishing touches on decorations and setting the table. As I descended the staircase, I noticed something odd. The kitchen door was wide open. It was unlike my father to leave it ajar, especially on Christmas morning. I called out, "Dad? Mom?" but received no immediate response. The kitchen was usually the heart of our home during the holidays, filled with the sounds of sizzling pans and cheerful conversation. Today, it was eerily silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. "Dad? Mom?" I repeated, stepping into the kitchen. The room was immaculate, every utensil in its place. Yet the door remained open as if someone had rushed in and left without a trace. A sense of unease settled over me. I went back to the living room to find my parents and siblings already seated at the table, their faces animated with excitement. "Morning, sweetheart." My mother greeted me with a warm smile. "We're just about to start dinner. Help yourself." I nodded, trying to shake off the strange feeling. As I took a seat, my younger sister, Lily, looked up at me with wide eyes. "Did you see the kitchen door? It was open when I came in." My father chuckled, waving off her concern. "Probably just left it open for some fresh air. Nothing to worry about." We began our meal, the conversation flowing effortlessly as we shared stories and passed around dishes. The room was filled with laughter and the clinking of silverware against plates. But as the evening progressed, a subtle tension began to weave itself into the fabric of our celebration. It was during dessert, a rich chocolate pudding topped with whipped cream, that things started to take a strange turn. As we enjoyed our sweet treats, I noticed a figure standing by the large bay window in the kitchen. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light or perhaps a reflection. But as I focused my gaze, the figure became clearer. It was a man dressed in tattered red clothes, his attire reminiscent of a holiday outfit but worn and frayed, giving him a ghostly appearance. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. "Did anyone else see that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The room fell silent, all eyes darting toward the window. My parents glanced up briefly, then quickly returned to their conversation, offering no reassurance. Lily clutched her plate tightly, her eyes wide with fear. "Maybe it's just someone lost," she whispered. But no one else seemed to notice the man any further. We continued our meal, though the image of the stranger lingered in my mind. a dark cloud overshadowing our joyful gathering. As the night wore on, the feeling of being watched intensified, a cold presence lurking just beyond our sight. Later that evening, after the dishes were cleared and the family retired to the living room for after-dinner drinks, I couldn't shake the sense of unease. I decided to investigate, driven by a mixture of fear and curiosity. Stepping back into the kitchen, I scanned the room for any sign of the mysterious figure. The space was still and silent, the only sound the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Just as I was about to dismiss it as my imagination, I heard a soft, raspy whisper, "Join us." The voice was barely audible, carried on a cold breeze that sent shivers down my spine. I spun around, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. But there was nothing there. The kitchen door, now firmly closed, seemed to swallow any trace of movement. I hurried back to the living room, my heart racing. My parents were sitting with my brother, Tom, who had stayed up late working on his laptop. "Is everything okay?" my mother asked. Noticing my distressed expression, I hesitated before speaking. "I think there was someone in the kitchen, a man in red." She exchanged a concerned glance with my father. "Are you sure? Maybe you just saw a reflection." Before I could respond, the room grew inexplicably cold. The fire in the hearth crackled, sending sparks dancing into the air. The temperature dropped further, and my breath became visible in the frigid air. My parents and Tom looked around, confusion and fear etching their faces. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the room was plunged into darkness. The only illumination came from the glowing embers in the fireplace, casting long, eerie shadows across the walls. A low, mournful moan echoed through the room, growing louder and more intense. The shadows seemed to twist and contort, taking on the shape of ghostly figures. "Who's there?" my father demanded, his voice firm despite the fear evident in his eyes. The moaning intensified, transforming into anguished cries. Out of the darkness, the figure of the man in red materialized, his face obscured by shadows, eyes hollow and empty. He moved towards us with an otherworldly grace, each step echoing ominously in the silent room. "Leave this place," he whispered, his voice carrying a haunting sorrow. "You should not have summoned me." Panic erupted as the family scrambled to react. My mother grabbed Tom's arm, pulling him toward the exit. But the doors and windows were no longer responsive. Locked tight as if by an unseen force, the man in red advanced, his presence overwhelming and suffocating. "We have to stay calm," my father instructed, though his voice betrayed his fear. "There must be a way to end this." As he spoke, the room began to shift, the shadows swirling around us like a vortex. Memories of the man's presence flashed through my mind, visions of tattered red clothes, empty spaces where he should have been, and the lingering sense of loss that clung to him like a second skin. It was as if he was bound to our home, a restless spirit trapped by some unresolved grievance. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What do you want from us?" The man paused, his figure wavering like smoke. "I am bound by sorrow and regret. My existence is tied to this house, to the Christmases I once cherished. But darkness took me from my joy, leaving me to wander in eternal anguish." Tears welled up in my mother's eyes as she stepped forward, reaching out a tentative hand. "We're sorry. We didn't mean to disturb you. Please, let us help." The man in red hesitated, his form flickering between solidity and shadow. "Help me find peace," he implored. "Release me from this torment." Desperation fueled my father's actions. "What can we do? How can we help you?" The air grew colder, the presence of the man intensifying. "Find the lost relic," he whispered, his voice filled with a haunting urgency. "It holds the key to my release. Only then can I move on." With that, the man began to fade, his figure dissolving into the shadows until he was nothing more than a lingering echo of sorrow. The room's oppressive atmosphere lifted slightly, but the task ahead weighed heavily on us. Determined to help, we set out to uncover the mystery behind the lost relic. The following days were filled with research and exploration, delving into the history of our family and the old Whitaker estate that had been in our possession for generations. We scoured old journals, letters, and photographs, piecing together the fragments of a forgotten past. It was in an old attic chest that we found it, a small, ornate box adorned with intricate carvings and a deep red ribbon. Inside lay a delicate silver locket, tarnished with age but still beautifully crafted. Alongside it was a faded photograph of a man who bore a striking resemblance to the stranger we had encountered. It must be his, my father concluded, holding the locket reverently. This locket was mine grandfather's. He always kept it close, especially during Christmas. We realized that the locket held the key to the man's release. It was a symbol of love and remembrance, a relic of happier times now tainted by sorrow and loss. Determined to fulfill the stranger's request, we planned a ceremonial return of the locket to its rightful place. On Christmas Eve, we gathered in the kitchen once more, the empty chair standing solemnly at the head of the table. The atmosphere was tense, the memory of the previous encounter lingering in the air. My mother held the locket, her hands trembling slightly as she prepared to complete the ritual. "Grandfather Edward," she began, her voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at her. "We honor your memory and seek to release your spirit from this place. May this relic bring you the peace you deserve." As she placed the locket on the empty chair, the room seemed to hold its breath. The temperature dropped, and the shadows lengthened, converging around us in a tight circle. A soft, glowing light emanated from the locket, filling the room with a warm, golden hue. The man in red reappeared, his presence now less menacing and more serene. His hollow eyes softened, and a genuine smile graced his features. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice filled with gratitude. "You have set me free." With that, his figure began to dissolve, the light enveloping him until he was nothing more than a memory, a fleeting shadow of the sorrow he once carried. The room returned to its normal state. The oppressive cold lifted, replaced by the comforting warmth of family and tradition. In the days that followed, the Whitaker house felt lighter, the lingering presence of sorrow replaced by a renewed sense of hope and unity. We knew that by honoring our past and addressing the unresolved grief, we had not only helped a restless spirit find peace, but also strengthened the bonds that held our family together. But every Christmas, as I sit by the window watching the snowfall, I can't help but glance at the empty chair, a silent reminder of the night when the past reached out to touch our present. It serves as a testament to the power of remembrance and the importance of facing our fears, ensuring that even the most haunted of spirits can find their way to peace. And as the years go by, the story of the uninvited guest becomes a cherished family legend, a reminder that sometimes the most profound connections are forged in the face of fear and uncertainty. The empty chair no longer symbolizes loss, but rather the enduring love that binds us across the boundaries of life and death, ensuring that no one is ever truly forgotten. Story number 3. The white dress. I still remember that Christmas dinner in 2007 like it was yesterday. The snow had fallen thickly over our small town in Ontario, blanketing the streets in a pristine white layer that reflected the twinkling holiday lights. Our house, a cozy 2-story nestled among towering pines, had always been the heart of neighborhood festivities. That year, my parents decided to host a grand Christmas meal, inviting every family on our block. It was meant to be a celebration of community and togetherness, a way to bring warmth during the long, cold winter nights. I was 16 then, perched on the edge of adolescence, grappling with the usual teenage angst and the lingering sadness of losing my younger brother, Ethan. 3 years prior, Christmas had always been bittersweet, a reminder of what we had lost. My parents tried their best to maintain the festive spirit, decorating the house meticulously and preparing an array of dishes that smelled heavenly. But underneath the surface, the air was thick with unspoken grief. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across our living room, the first guests began to arrive. Mrs. Thompson from next door, Mr. and Mrs. Davis from 2 blocks over, and the Martins from the end of the street, all greeted warmly by my parents. Laughter and conversation filled the room, the sound of clinking glasses mingling with the soft strains of Christmas carols playing in the background. I took a seat at the head of the table, my place of honor as the eldest child. My parents sat beside me, exchanging smiles with each new arrival. The dining room was a sight to behold. A large mahogany table set with our finest china, gleaming silverware, and an impressive centerpiece, a towering Christmas tree adorned with sparkling ornaments and twinkling lights. As we settled into the meal, the warmth of the family and friends around me provided a temporary respite from the heavy memories that weighed on my heart. We shared stories, exchanged gifts, and reveled in the joyous atmosphere. It was during dessert, a rich chocolate Yule log, that things began to take an unsettling turn. I glanced around the table, noticing a small, empty seat at the far end, draped with a delicate lace cloth. It was always reserved for my grandfather, who had passed away a few years earlier. His absence was keenly felt, and leaving his place empty was a silent tribute to his memory. But tonight, something felt different. The empty chair seemed to draw attention, almost beckoning. Just as I was about to return to my own plate, I caught sight of her, a little girl in a flowing white dress, standing motionlessly in the corner of the room. She was petite, with long, dark hair cascading over her shoulders, and her dress was pristine, untouched by the dust of neglect that had settled over our home. Her presence was both out of place and hauntingly familiar. "Did anyone else see that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The table fell silent as everyone glanced towards the corner. No one seemed to notice her. Confusion rippled through the room. "See what?" Mrs. Davis asked, her brow furrowed in concern. "I saw a little girl in a white dress standing over there," I explained, pointing towards the corner. There was a collective moment of silence before one of the guests, Mrs. Martin, hesitantly responded, "I didn't see anyone. Maybe it was just a trick of the light," my father suggested, though his voice lacked its usual assurance. We tried to brush it off, continuing our conversation, but the image of the girl lingered in my mind. Her eyes were fixed on us, unblinking and sorrowful, as if she was waiting for something or someone. My heart raced, and a sense of unease settled over me like a heavy blanket. As the night wore on, the atmosphere shifted subtly. The cheerful chatter grew subdued, and the once warm and inviting room felt colder, the shadows in the corners deepening unnaturally. I kept glancing towards the girl, but she remained motionless, a silent sentinel in our midst. After dinner, my parents suggested moving to the living room for after-dinner drinks and more relaxed conversation. We did so, the transition seamless yet marked by the lingering tension. The little girl was nowhere to be seen, and the empty chair had returned to its solemn vigil at the head of the table. I excused myself to grab a cup of tea, needing a moment alone to process the unsettling experience. As I entered the kitchen, I felt a chill run down my spine. The room was dark except for the soft glow of the refrigerator light. I noticed the kitchen door was slightly ajar, just as it had been when I first arrived. My heart pounded in my chest, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I turned to leave when I heard a faint whisper, barely audible over the ticking of the clock. "Help me!" The words sent a shiver through me, and I spun around, flashlight in hand. But there was nothing there. The kitchen was empty, save for the usual clutter and the lingering scent of our meal. Determined to find some explanation, I returned to the living room, where my parents and siblings were engaged in subdued conversation. I sat down, trying to push the eerie sensations to the back of my mind. But as the night deepened, the whispers returned, growing slightly louder and more insistent. "Help me!" I glanced around the room, my eyes finally resting on the empty chair. The atmosphere was thick with tension, the warmth replaced by an oppressive heaviness. It was then that I noticed her again, the little girl in the white dress, standing in the corner, her eyes meeting mine. "Help me," she whispered again, her voice filled with sorrow. I froze, unable to move or speak, as the room seemed to hold its breath. My parents and siblings stared in confusion, oblivious to the apparition that stood before me. "Who's there?" I managed to choke out, my voice shaking. The girl didn't respond, her expression one of profound sadness. Slowly, she began to fade, her form dissolving into the air like mist. The room returned to normal, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as abruptly as it had descended. The empty chair stood silently at the head of the table, untouched and still. The rest of the evening passed in uneasy silence, the memory of the girl haunting me like a persistent shadow. That night, couldn't sleep, the whispers echoing in my mind, their plea for help a constant reminder of the unresolved sorrow that lingered in our home. The following morning, the incident was met with skepticism and disbelief. When I recounted what had happened, my family exchanged confused glances. "I didn't see anything," my father said firmly. "Maybe you were just stressed from all the planning." But deep down, I knew what I had seen was real, determined to uncover the truth. I began researching our family's history, delving into old photo albums and speaking with relatives who might have known more about our past. It wasn't long before I stumbled upon a series of old letters and journals belonging to my grandfather, Edward Whittaker. One entry, in particular, caught my eye. It was dated Christmas 1980, exactly 5 years before his passing, and detailed a hauntingly familiar scene. My grandfather had written about a little girl in a white dress who would appear during Christmas dinners, watching silently from the corner of the room. He described her as a spirit of sorrow, a reminder of a tragedy that had befallen our family decades earlier. According to the entry, Edward had lost his own daughter, Emily, in a car accident on Christmas Eve. The little girl in the white dress was Emily's spirit, forever bound to our family, seeking solace and remembrance during the holiday season. The empty chair at the head of the table was meant to honor her memory, a place where she could feel her presence and remain a part of our celebrations. Armed with this newfound knowledge, I felt a mixture of sorrow and responsibility. It was clear that Emily's spirit was still searching for peace, her unresolved grief preventing her from moving on. Determined to help, I shared my findings with my parents, who were moved by the depth of my discovery. That Christmas, we decided to honor Emily in a more meaningful way. Instead of simply leaving the chair empty, we created a special place for her, decorated with her favorite ornaments, a small photo of her smiling at a Christmas party, and a candle to symbolize her enduring light in our lives. We gathered as a family, sharing stories of Emily and celebrating her memory with tears and laughter intertwined. As we did, the room felt lighter, the oppressive tension replaced by a sense of warmth and closure. The whispers faded, and the presence of the little girl in the white dress became less intrusive, her sorrow now acknowledged and honored. It was as if by recognizing her pain and remembering her, we had finally helped her find the peace she had been seeking for so long. In the years that followed, the visits from Emily became less frequent, her presence a comforting reminder of the love that transcends even death. Our Christmas dinners continued to be filled with joy and remembrance, the empty chair now a cherished symbol of our family's resilience and enduring bond. But every now and then, late on Christmas night, I still feel a gentle chill in the air and catch a fleeting glimpse of a little girl in a white dress standing in the corner. And though I no longer fear her presence, I remain ever mindful of the fragility of life and the importance of holding onto the memories of those we love, ensuring that no spirit, no matter how sorrowful, is ever truly forgotten. Story number 4. The last meal. I still wake up every Christmas morning with a sense of unease, a lingering shadow from the night that forever changed our family. It was 1978, a time when the world seemed simpler, yet darkness hid in the most unexpected places. Our home in rural Texas was a picture of warmth and tradition, especially during the holidays. My parents, grandparents, and siblings gathered around the dining table each year, celebrating with hearty meals and heartfelt laughter. But that Christmas, everything changed. Grandma Eleanor was the heart of our family. At 72, her presence was a comforting constant, her stories weaving the fabric of our shared history. She was known for her baking, especially her famous bread rolls that everyone looked forward to each Christmas. That year, however, there was a subtle tension in the air, an unspoken worry that none of us could quite place. The evening began like any other. The house was filled with the aroma of roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, and Grandma's freshly baked bread. The dining table was set meticulously, every place adorned with festive decorations and candles that cast a warm glow. We gathered around, exchanging stories and enjoying each other's company. As we settled into our meal, Grandma Eleanor took her usual seat at the head of the table. Her silver hair gleamed under the candlelight, and her eyes sparkled with the joy of the season. I sat beside her, sharing a joke with my younger brother, Tommy, who was eagerly awaiting his slice of pumpkin pie. The conversation flowed smoothly until a sudden, sharp gasp pierced the room. Grandma Eleanor clutched her throat, her face contorted in pain. Panic erupted as my father jumped up, his chair clattering to the floor. "Grandma!" he shouted, rushing to her side. We watched in horror as she struggled to breathe, her hands clawing at her throat. My mother immediately called for an ambulance, while the rest of us tried to comfort her. But it was clear she was in grave distress. The room filled with frantic voices and the sound of her labored breathing. But nothing we did could alleviate her suffering. Within minutes, the paramedics arrived, working desperately to save her. They transported her to the nearest hospital, where we awaited news with bated breath. Hours passed, the night deepening around us, until finally, a somber doctor emerged. "I'm sorry," he said softly. She choked on a piece of bread. We did everything we could. The weight of his words settled over us like a heavy blanket. Grandma Eleanor was gone, taken from us by a simple, tragic accident. The following year, our family grappled with grief, trying to find solace in each other and the traditions that now felt hollow without her. Christmas 1979 arrived, a year after Grandma's untimely death. My parents decided to hold another dinner, determined to honor her memory and keep her spirit alive in our hearts. The house was decorated as always, the dining table set with care, and the empty chair at the head still draped in a delicate lace cloth, a silent tribute to her absence. The night began with a mix of joy and sorrow. My father raised a glass, toasting to Grandma Eleanor and the love she had given us. We shared stories, some happy memories, others tinged with sadness. As the meal progressed, the air grew thick with unspoken emotions. The absence of Grandma Eleanor felt more palpable than ever. As dessert was served, a rich, creamy pudding that was one of Grandma's favorites. I glanced towards the empty chair. It stood there, an island of silence amidst the bustling activity. My heart ached with the void her absence had created. But we pressed on, determined to find comfort in each other's presence. Just as we were about to clear the plates, a chill swept through the room. The candles flickered violently, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The warmth that had filled the room seemed to dissipate, replaced by an unnatural cold. My mother shivered, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Did anyone else feel that?" Tommy asked, his voice trembling. Before anyone could respond, the sound of scraping cut through the silence. It was faint at first, like the gentle tapping of a spoon against a glass, coming from the direction of the empty chair. We all froze, eyes darting towards it, but no one moved, probably just the wind. My father tried to reassure us, though his voice lacked conviction. But then, The scraping intensified, growing louder and more insistent. The table seemed to tilt, dishes and cutlery rattling ominously as if an unseen force was manipulating them. The candles flickered wildly, casting grotesque shapes that seemed to reach out towards us. A voice, barely more than a whisper, echoed through the room. "Why did you leave me?" We stared in disbelief, the voice sending a shiver down my spine. The room fell silent again, the only sound our ragged breathing and the faint crackling of the fireplace. My heart pounded in my chest as the realization sank in. We were not alone. "Who's there?" my mother demanded, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the empty chair began to move, creaked as if someone were shifting their weight, the delicate lace cloth rustling softly. We watched in horror as the chair pulled back, revealing a figure, a little girl in a flowing white dress, her hair cascading over her shoulders, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. "Grandma," I whispered, the word tasting foreign on my tongue. The figure remained silent, her presence both haunting and heart-wrenching. She slowly raised her hand, pointing towards the kitchen door, now ajar as if someone had hastily exited. A sense of dread washed over me as memories of the previous year's tragedy resurfaced. My father took a deep breath, stepping towards the door. "We need to find out what's happening," he said firmly, though his voice wavered slightly. As he approached, the room seemed to grow colder, the shadows deepening ominously. He reached out to close the door, but his hand passed through it as if it were made of smoke. "Dad," I called, my voice breaking. He turned, his eyes meeting mine with a mix of fear and determination. "Stay here. I'm going to see what's going on." With that, he stepped through the door, disappearing into the darkness beyond. The house fell silent once more, the figure in white fading away until only the empty chair remained. Minutes felt like hours as we waited, the tension palpable. Finally, the sound of footsteps echoed through the hallways, and my father returned, his face pale and eyes haunted. He found something," he stammered, collapsing into his chair. "There was an old kitchen, long abandoned. I found her diary." A collective gasp filled the room. "Her diary?" my mother asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was the original owner of this house," my father continued, struggling to gather his thoughts. "Grandma Eleanor told us stories about his daughter, Emily. She died tragically a year after moving in, and he never recovered. He kept a diary, detailing his grief and his inability to let go." We listened intently as my father recounted the diary's contents. Emily's favorite foods, her love for Christmas, and her growing sorrow after the accident that took her life. It was clear that her spirit was trapped in our home, unable to find peace after the sudden loss. Determined to help, we decided to perform a ceremony to honor her memory and allow her spirit to rest. The following Christmas, we gathered once more around the dining table, the empty chair now a focal point of our collective grief and hope. We lit candles, placed flowers on the empty seat, and read aloud passages from her diary, sharing stories of Emily's laughter and love. As we spoke, the air seemed to lighten, the oppressive cold lifting as if our words were reaching out to her. As midnight approached, the room was filled with a serene stillness. We held hands, united in our intention to help Emily find peace. The candles burned brightly, casting a warm glow that enveloped us in comfort. For a moment, the atmosphere was perfect until the clock struck 12. The scraping sound returned, louder this time, accompanied by a soft sigh. The empty chair began to move once more, but instead of a ghostly figure, we saw a small, ethereal light hovering above it. The light pulsed gently, casting a soothing radiance that filled the room. "Thank you," the voice whispered, clearer this time. "I can finally rest." The light expanded, enveloping the entire room in a brilliant glow. The air grew warm, the shadows dissipating as peace settled over us. We watched in awe as the light descended to the empty chair, gently lifting and carrying it away, leaving no trace of its presence. Tears welled up in my eyes as I felt a profound sense of relief and closure. Emily was free, her spirit no longer bound to our home by sorrow and regret. The weight that had burdened our family for so long was lifted, replaced by a renewed sense of hope and unity. In the years that followed, Christmas dinners continued with the same warmth and joy, the empty chair now a cherished symbol of love and remembrance. We never saw Emily again, but her presence was felt in the traditions we upheld and the memories we cherished. But sometimes, late at night, I still feel a gentle breeze and hear the faint sound of laughter, a reminder of the little girl in the white dress who once watched over our family. And as I sit by the fireplace each Christmas, I hold onto the belief that love and remembrance can transcend even the darkest of losses, ensuring that no spirit is ever truly forgotten. The house in rural Texas remains a beacon of holiday warmth, its walls echoing with the laughter and love of generations past. And every Christmas, as we gather around the table, we honor not just those who have left us, but also those who remain in our hearts, forever a part of our enduring family legacy. Story number 5. Knocking in the night. I still remember that Christmas in 1986 as if it happened yesterday, despite the years that have passed. Growing up in the quiet countryside of Germany, the Bauer family Christmas dinners were the highlight of the year. Our old farmhouse, nestled among snow-covered pines, was transformed into a haven of warmth and festivity every December. Little did we know, that particular Christmas would leave an indelible mark on our lives. Shrouded in mystery and fear, I was 12 at the time, sitting at the head of the long wooden table with my parents, grandparents, and 2 younger siblings. The aroma of roasted goose, spiced mulled wine, and freshly baked stollen filled the air, mingling with the scent of pine from the towering Christmas tree that stood proudly in the corner. Laughter and cheerful conversation echoed through the halls, the sound of holiday music adding to the joyous atmosphere. As midnight approached, the family began to settle into the final courses of our meal. We exchanged gifts, shared stories, and basked in the glow of the crackling fireplace. My grandfather, a stern yet kind man, raised his glass for a toast, to family, to love, and to many more Christmases together. He proclaimed, his voice steady and filled with emotion. The clinking of glasses followed, and we all took a sip, the rich flavors warming us from the inside out. It was during this moment of togetherness that the first knock echoed through the house, a soft, tentative tapping that seemed out of place amidst the merriment. "Who's that?" my father asked, his brow furrowing in confusion. We glanced toward the kitchen door, where the sound had originated, but no one was there. The door was securely closed, and the kitchen was bustling with activity as my mother prepared the last of the desserts. "Probably just the wind," my father suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. The night was clear, with no storm in sight, but the knocking persisted, growing slightly more insistent with each passing minute. Grandmother Eleanor, always the most composed, tried to reassure us. "It's probably just a neighbor, or maybe a delivery person. Don't worry, dear." We continued our dinner, though the knocking remained a constant. Eerie backdrop. As we reached for the final servings of plum pudding, the tapping intensified, now rhythmic and deliberate, almost as if someone was trying to get our attention. "All right, that's enough," my father declared, standing up from his seat. "I'll go check it out." The room fell silent as he approached the kitchen door, his steps measured and cautious. He reached out to open it, only to find it firmly shut. No signs of forced entry. He gave it another push, but it wouldn't budge. "Strange," he muttered, turning back to face us. "The door seems to be locked from the inside." Before we could react, the knocking grew louder, more frantic, echoing through the house like a persistent ghost. My heart raced as the atmosphere shifted, the warmth of the evening giving way to a chill that seemed to seep into our bones. Maybe we should all check together, my mother suggested, her voice trembling slightly, just to make sure. Reluctantly, we agreed, gathering around the kitchen door. My younger sister, Anna, clung to my arm, her eyes wide with fear. Do we have to? We have to, my father replied firmly. It's probably nothing, but better safe than sorry. Together, we attempted to open the door once more, but it remained unyielding. The knocking continued, now accompanied by a low, mournful moan that sent shivers down our spines. It was as if the house itself was alive, responding to our attempts to reach out. What's happening? I whispered, my voice barely audible over the relentless tapping. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness as the power went out, leaving us in complete blackness. Gasps and murmurs filled the air as we fumbled for our flashlights, the beam of light cutting through the inky blackness. The knocking had stopped abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed down on us. Everyone, stay calm, my father instructed, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. I'll go upstairs and see if I can find the breaker. As he ascended the staircase, the rest of us huddled together in the dining room, the only sound our ragged breathing and the distant ticking of the grandfather clock. Minutes felt like hours as we waited, the uncertainty gnawing at our nerves. Finally, my father returned, a weary expression on his face. The breaker was tripped. I reset it, but I don't know why it went out. Relief washed over us as the lights flickered back on, restoring the familiar warmth to the room. We sighed collectively, the tension easing as the festive atmosphere resumed. We tried to brush off the unsettling events, attributing them to a power surge or an overzealous neighbor. But a lingering sense of unease remained. That night, sleep eluded me as I lay in bed, the memory of the knocking replaying in my mind, the image of the empty kitchen door, the persistent tapping, and the sudden darkness haunted my thoughts, a reminder that something was terribly wrong. The following morning, we discovered that Grandma Eleanor had been found unconscious on the kitchen floor. A half-eaten slice of bread lodged in her throat. She had choked during the night, her life slipping away in a silent, tragic moment, despite our frantic efforts to save her. She passed away that morning, leaving our family shattered and grief-stricken. In the days that followed, the events of that Christmas began to unravel in unsettling ways. Neighbors reported strange occurrences in our home, flickering lights, unexplained noises, and the feeling of being watched. We tried to maintain normalcy, but the shadow of loss hung heavy over us, exacerbating the strange happenings. One evening, a year after Grandma Eleanor's death, we decided to hold another Christmas dinner, hoping to honor her memory and find some semblance of closure. The house was decorated as always, the dining table set with care, and the empty chair at the head placed with reverence. It was a somber tribute to her absence, a silent reminder of the tragedy that had befallen us. As we sat down to eat, the atmosphere was thick with emotion, our conversations tinged with sadness and remembrance. The room was quieter than usual, the festive spirit subdued by the weight of our grief. Yet, amidst the somber mood, a familiar sensation began to creep into the room, the sense of an unseen presence watching over us. As the evening progressed, the knocking returned, soft at first, then growing more insistent. My heart pounded as I glanced toward the kitchen door, now standing wide open as if inviting something or someone inside. The door creaked on its hinges, and the cold draft of winter air swept into the room, extinguishing some of the candles and sending shivers down our spines. "Not again," my father muttered, rising from his seat. "This isn't right." We approached the door cautiously, the sound of knocking echoing through the silent house. My father reached out to close it, but his hand passed through the air, as if there was no barrier between us and the outside world. The knocking continued, more frantic and desperate than before, accompanied by the faint sound of scraping against wood. Suddenly, the door swung open with a violent force, and a gust of icy wind swept into the room. Standing in the doorway was the little girl from that fateful night, her dress now pristine and shimmering under the candlelight. Her eyes were hollow, filled with an unspoken sorrow that seemed to pierce through my very soul. "Why did you leave me?" she whispered, her voice ethereal and haunting. Terror gripped me as I stared into her empty gaze. "We didn't mean to. We miss you, Grandma," I stammered, the realization dawning on me that the little girl was a manifestation of her spirit, unable to find peace after her untimely death. The room grew colder, the shadows lengthening as her presence enveloped us. My mother stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Grandma Eleanor, please find peace. We love you and remember you always." The little girl's form began to shimmer, her sorrowful expression softening. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice fading as a gentle light enveloped her. With one final, lingering glance, she vanished, leaving behind a profound sense of calm and closure. As the night settled into a peaceful silence, we sat together, the weight of our loss now accompanied by a sense of understanding and acceptance. The knocking had ceased, replaced by the comforting sounds of our family gathered in unity and love. Years have passed since that Christmas, and our family has grown and changed. But the memory of that night remains a poignant reminder of the fragile line between life and death, and the enduring power of love and remembrance. The old farmhouse still stands, its walls echoing with the laughter and tears of generations past, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of tragedy. Every Christmas, we leave an extra plate at the head of the table, a silent invitation for Grandma Eleanor to join us once more. And though we never hear the knocking again, the presence of her spirit lingers, a comforting reminder that she is always with us, watching over our family and ensuring that the bonds we share transcend even the darkest of nights. And so, as the snow falls softly outside and the glow of the Christmas tree lights fills our home, we celebrate not just the holiday, but the enduring love that binds us together, forever cherishing the memories of those we have lost and the hope that their spirits find peace in our hearts. Story number 6. The Man in the Mirror. I still remember that Christmas dinner in 2013 as if it happened yesterday. Despite the years that have passed, our home in New York, an old Victorian nestled in a quiet neighborhood, had always been the centerpiece of our holiday celebrations. My parents, grandparents, and siblings would gather around the dining table every year, sharing stories, laughter, and delicious meals that filled the house with warmth and joy. But that Christmas, something changed, something dark and unsettling that would forever alter our perception of family gatherings. I was 16, perched on the cusp of adulthood, grappling with the usual teenage angst and the lingering sorrow of losing my younger brother, Ethan. 3 years earlier, Christmas had always been bittersweet, a reminder of what we had lost. My parents tried their best to maintain the festive spirit, decorating the house meticulously and preparing an array of dishes that smelled heavenly. Yet beneath the surface, the air was thick with unspoken grief. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across our living room, the first guests began to arrive. Mrs. Thompson from next door, Mr. and Mrs. Davis from 2 blocks over, and the Martins from the end of the street, all greeted warmly by my parents. Laughter and conversation filled the room, the sound of clinking glasses mingling with the soft strains of Christmas carols playing in the background. I took a seat at the head of the table, my place of honor as the eldest child. My parents sat beside me, exchanging smiles with each new arrival. The dining room was a sight to behold. A large mahogany table set with our finest china, gleaming silverware, and an impressive centerpiece, a towering Christmas tree adorned with sparkling ornaments and twinkling lights. As we settled into our meal, the warmth of the family and friends around me provided a temporary respite from the heavy memories that weighed on my heart. We shared stories, exchanged gifts, and reveled in the joyous atmosphere. It was during dessert, a rich chocolate Yule log, that things began to take an unsettling turn. I glanced around the table, noticing a small, empty seat at the far end, draped with a delicate lace cloth. It was always reserved for my grandfather, who had passed away a few years earlier. His absence was keenly felt, and leaving his place empty was a silent tribute to his memory. But tonight, something felt different. The empty chair seemed to draw attention, almost beckoning. Just as I was about to return to my own plate, I caught sight of her, a little girl in a flowing white dress, standing motionlessly in the corner of the room. She was petite, with long, dark hair cascading over her shoulders, and her dress was pristine, untouched by the dust of neglect that had settled over our home. Her presence was both out of place and hauntingly familiar. "Did anyone else see that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The table fell silent as everyone glanced toward the corner. No one seemed to notice her. Confusion rippled through the room. "See what?" Mrs. Davis asked, her brow furrowed in concern. "I saw a little girl in a white dress standing over there," I explained, pointing toward the corner. There was a collective moment of silence before one of the guests, Mrs. Martin, hesitantly responded, "I didn't see anyone. Maybe it was just a trick of the light," my father suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. But Lily's eyes held a flicker of something else, something unspoken. As the night deepened and the fire crackled in the hearth, the room seemed to grow colder, the shadows in the corners deepening unnaturally. It was as if she was waiting for something, or someone. My heart raced, and a sense of unease settled over me like a heavy blanket. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere shifted subtly. The cheerful chatter grew subdued, and the once warm and inviting room felt colder, the shadows in the corners deepening unnaturally. I kept glancing towards the girl, but she remained motionless, a silent sentinel in our midst. After dinner, my parents suggested moving to the living room for after-dinner drinks and more relaxed conversation. We did so, the transition seamless yet marked by the lingering tension. The little girl was nowhere to be seen, and the empty chair had returned to its solemn vigil at the head of the table. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As I sat with my family, the room was filled with tension, the joyous atmosphere now overshadowed by an invisible presence. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The cheerful music from the radio stuttered and died, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. It was then that a soft sigh echoed through the room, a barely audible sound that seemed to emanate from the empty chair. "Help me," the voice whispered, sending a chill down my spine. The atmosphere grew colder, the shadows lengthening as if responding to the voice. My heart pounded in my chest as the realization sank in. We were not alone. "Who's there?" my mother demanded, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the empty chair began to move, creaked as if someone were shifting their weight, the delicate lace cloth rustling softly. We watched in horror as the chair pulled back, revealing a figure, a little girl in a flowing white dress, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. "Grandma," I whispered, the word tasting foreign on my tongue. The figure remained silent, her presence both haunting and heart-wrenching. She slowly raised her hand, pointing toward the kitchen door, now ajar as if someone had hastily exited. A sense of dread washed over me as memories of the previous year's tragedy resurfaced. My father took a deep breath, stepping towards the door. "We need to find out what's happening," he said firmly, though his voice wavered slightly. As he approached, the room seemed to grow colder, the shadows deepening ominously. He reached out to close the door, but his hand passed through it as if it were made of smoke. The knocking continued, more frantic and desperate than before, accompanied by the faint sound of scraping against wood. "Stay calm," my father instructed, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "There must be a way to end this." But our attempts were futile. The little girl in white stood before us, her form shimmering with an otherworldly light. "Help me," she whispered again, her voice filled with sorrow and longing. Desperation fueled my father's actions. "What can we do? How can we help you?" The room grew colder, the presence of the little girl intensifying. "Find the lost relic," she whispered, her voice filled with a haunting urgency. "It holds the key to my release. Only then can I move on." With that, the little girl began to fade, her figure dissolving into the shadows until she was nothing more than a lingering echo of sorrow. The room's oppressive atmosphere lifted slightly, but the task ahead weighed heavily on us. Determined to help, we set out to uncover the mystery behind the lost relic. The following days were filled with research and exploration, delving into old family records and speaking with relatives who might have known more about our past. We scoured old journals, letters, and photographs, piecing together the fragments of a forgotten history. It wasn't long before I stumbled upon a series of old letters and journals belonging to my grandfather, Edward Whittaker. One entry, in particular, caught my eye. It was dated Christmas 1980, exactly 5 years before his passing, and detailed a hauntingly familiar scene. My grandfather had written about a little girl in a white dress who would appear during Christmas dinners, watching silently from the corner of the room. He described her as a spirit of sorrow, a reminder of a tragedy that had befallen our family decades earlier. According to the entry, Edward had lost his own daughter, Emily, in a car accident on Christmas Eve. The little girl in the white dress was Emily's spirit, forever bound to our home, seeking solace and remembrance during the holiday season. The empty chair at the head of the table was meant to honor her memory, a place where she could feel her presence and remain a part of our celebrations. Armed with this newfound knowledge, I felt a mixture of sorrow and responsibility. It was clear that Emily's spirit was still searching for peace, her unresolved grief preventing her from moving on. Determined to help, I shared my findings with my parents, who were moved by the depth of my discovery. That Christmas, we decided to honor Emily in a more meaningful way. Instead of simply leaving the chair empty, we created a special place for her, decorated with her favorite ornaments, a small photo of her smiling at a Christmas party, and a candle to symbolize her enduring light in our lives. We gathered as a family, sharing stories of Emily and celebrating her memory with tears and laughter intertwined. As we spoke the words, the air seemed to lighten, the oppressive cold lifting as if in response to our heartfelt plea. The whispers returned, but this time, they were gentle, almost comforting. "Thank you," they seemed to say, before fading into silence. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of closure, a belief that Emily had finally found peace. The empty chair no longer felt like a haunting presence, but a cherished memory that bound us together. But every Christmas, as I sit by the window watching the snowfall, I can't help but glance at the empty chair, a silent reminder of the night when the past reached out to touch our present. It serves as a testament to the power of remembrance and the importance of facing our fears, ensuring that even the most haunted of spirits can find their way to peace. Years have passed since that fateful Christmas, and the memory of that night still lingers, a poignant reminder of the fragile line between life and death, and the enduring power of love and remembrance. The old farmhouse still stands, its walls echoing with the laughter and tears of generations past, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of tragedy. Every Christmas, we leave an extra plate at the head of the table, not out of obligation, but as a symbol of the enduring love that connects us across the realms of life and death. And though we never see Emily again, her presence is felt in the traditions we uphold and the memories we cherish. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear the faint sound of clinking glasses and soft whispers, a comforting reminder that Emily is still with us, watching over our family and ensuring that the spirit of Christmas remains alive in our hearts. Story number 7. Echoes from the basement. I still wake up in a cold sweat every Christmas morning, the memory of that night in 2015 replaying in my mind like a haunting melody. Growing up in the serene countryside of Scotland, our family home was nestled among rolling hills and dense forests, a picturesque setting that seemed plucked from a storybook. Every December, my parents, siblings, and I would gather for our traditional Christmas dinner, a time of joy, laughter, and cherished traditions. But that year, the festive spirit was shattered by an unsettling mystery that would forever change our lives. It was a crisp December evening, the air filled with the scent of pine from the towering Christmas tree that stood proudly in our spacious living room. The fireplace crackled warmly, casting a golden glow that danced across the faces of my family members. My father carved the turkey with practiced ease, while my mother arranged the side dishes, her movements graceful and precise. My younger sister, Emily, was busy decorating gingerbread houses, her laughter ringing out like chimes in the night. As we sat down to enjoy our meal, the room was alive with conversation and the clinking of silverware against plates. The joy of the season enveloped us, creating an atmosphere of pure contentment. Little did we know, something dark and inexplicable was about to intrude upon our idyllic celebration. It was just after midnight when we first heard it, the faintest sound of singing, carried on a breeze that seemed to slip through the cracks of our old house. At first, we thought it was a prank played by the neighborhood kids, perhaps a misguided attempt to add some excitement to our dinner. But as the minutes passed, the singing grew louder, more melodic, and undeniably sorrowful. "Did you hear that?" I asked my brother, Liam, who was engrossed in a game on his phone. He looked up, a puzzled expression on his face. "Hear what?" The singing persisted, its haunting tune echoing through the halls of our home. My parents exchanged uneasy glances, their smiles fading as the melody continued. The song was unfamiliar, unlike any Christmas carol we knew, carrying a melancholic undertone that sent shivers down our spines. "Maybe it's just the wind," my father suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. I decided to investigate, driven by a mix of curiosity and unease. Quietly, I made my way towards the basement door, the source of the eerie singing. The basement had always been a place of mystery for me. Dark, cool, and filled with forgotten relics from years past. I reached out to pull the door open, the hinges creaking softly in protest. As I descended the narrow staircase, the singing grew louder, more distinct. It was a beautiful yet haunting melody, one that seemed to tug at the very fabric of my soul. The basement was dimly lit, shadows dancing on the walls as I moved deeper into the space. Rows of old furniture, boxes of forgotten belongings, and the remnants of past holidays filled the room. But there was no sign of anyone or anything else. I paused, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to locate the source of the singing. It seemed to emanate from the far end of the basement, near the old and used fireplace. I approached cautiously, the notes of the song wrapping around me like a ghostly embrace. As I drew closer, the singing ceased abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. Confused and unnerved, I turned to leave, but the basement door slammed shut with a force that reverberated through the room. Panic surged through me as I reached for the handle, only to find it immovable. The temperature dropped sharply, my breath visible in the frigid air, and the darkness seemed to press in on all sides. "Help!" I called out, my voice echoing through the basement. But no one answered. The singing had returned, now louder and more urgent, as if beckoning me to stay. I felt a presence behind me, a cold breath on my neck, and the unmistakable sensation of being watched by unseen eyes. I spun around, my flashlight flickering wildly, revealing nothing but the empty basement. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The singing swelled, and for a moment, the shadows in the room seemed to coalesce into the form of a woman in a flowing white dress, her long hair cascading over her shoulders. Her face was obscured by darkness, but her presence was undeniable, haunting, sorrowful, and filled with an unspoken plea. "Why are you here?" I whispered, my fear giving way to a desperate need for answers. The figure raised her hand, a spectral finger pointing towards the old fireplace. "Help me," she murmured, her voice echoing like a distant memory. "Release me." Before I could respond, the room began to shift. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting as the temperature plummeted further. My flashlight flickered again, and in the brief darkness, I saw her face, hollow eyes filled with anguish and desperation. "Find the relic," she urged, her voice fading into a whisper. "Only then can I be free." With that, the apparition vanished, leaving me alone in the oppressive silence of the basement. I frantically tried to open the door, but it remained firmly shut. The only way out was through the darkness, and I had no idea where to begin searching. Summoning all my courage, I began to explore the basement, guided only by the dim beam of my flashlight. The singing had stopped, replaced by the eerie stillness that clung to the room like a heavy blanket. As I moved deeper into the basement, I stumbled upon a hidden door behind a stack of old boxes. It was small, almost inconspicuous, but something about it seemed important. I reached out to push the door open, the hinges creaking loudly in the silent basement. Inside, I found a small storage room, cluttered with old furniture and dusty relics. In the center of the room stood an ornate wooden chest, intricately carved with symbols that seemed to shimmer in the faint light. My heart raced as I approached it, feeling the weight of the unseen presence that had urged me to find the relic. With trembling hands, I opened the chest, revealing a collection of old photographs, letters, and a small, ornate mirror. The mirror stood out, its frame adorned with delicate engravings and a single, blood-red ribbon tied around the base. As I picked it up, the reflection staring back at me was not my own but the image of the little girl in the white dress, her eyes filled with sorrow. I realized then that this mirror was the relic the apparition had spoken of, a conduit between our world and the spirits that lingered in our home. Determined to help her find peace, I knew what I had to do. I carefully placed the mirror back in the chest, understanding that it needed to be honored and respected. Returning to the main part of the basement, I felt a presence behind me, the spectral figure of the woman in white appearing once more. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice now filled with gratitude and relief. "You have set me free." As she faded into the shadows, the temperature began to rise, the oppressive cold lifting as suddenly as it had descended. The basement door creaked open, the way back to the living room now clear and unobstructed. Exhausted but relieved, I made my way upstairs, the remnants of the eerie encounter lingering in my mind. The following day, I decided to check the security cameras we had installed after our move. As I reviewed the footage, I froze in horror at what I saw. The image of the little girl in white sat at the table, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. Even though no one had ever seen her before, her presence was undeniable, a haunting reminder of the night's events. Determined to uncover the truth, I delved into our family's history, speaking with relatives and researching old records. I discovered that the previous owners of our home had also experienced similar phenomena, voices, apparitions, and unexplained occurrences that plagued their Christmas celebrations. The story of the woman in white seemed to be a recurring tragedy, a spirit bound by sorrow and longing for remembrance. I realized that the mirror was not just a relic but a focal point of the unresolved grief that had haunted our home for decades. To truly help her find peace, we needed to honor her memory and acknowledge the pain that had kept her spirit tethered to our world. That Christmas, we decided to hold a memorial dinner, inviting friends and family to join us in remembering the woman in white. We placed the mirror in a place of honor, surrounded by photos and mementos of past Christmases, a tribute to the spirit that had longed to be seen and remembered. As we gathered around the table, the atmosphere was filled with a sense of unity and purpose. We shared stories of those we had lost, our voices mingling with the flickering candlelight. The room felt warmer, the shadows less oppressive, as if our collective remembrance was healing the wounds that had bound the spirit to our home. Just as we concluded the evening, a soft, melodic singing filled the room, blending seamlessly with the festive music. We looked around, But there was no one else present. The little girl in white appeared once more, her presence now gentle and serene. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with peace and gratitude. "I can finally rest." As she faded away, the room seemed to glow with a comforting light, the oppressive shadows dissipating into the night. The mirror no longer reflected her sorrowful gaze, but instead showed the joyful faces of our family, united in love and remembrance. In the years that followed, our Christmas celebrations continued with a renewed sense of purpose. The memory of that night served as a reminder of the importance of honoring those we had lost and the enduring power of family and love. The singing no longer echoed through our home, replaced by the harmonious sounds of laughter and joy. But sometimes, late on Christmas nights, I still feel a gentle warmth in the air and hear the faint strains of a beautiful melody, a lingering echo of the spirit that once sought our remembrance. It serves as a comforting reminder that even in the darkest of times, love and memory can bridge the gap between the living and the dead, ensuring that no soul is ever truly forgotten. And so, as I sit by the fireplace each Christmas, surrounded by the warmth of my family, I cherish the memory of that haunting night, knowing that we have honored her spirit and allowed her to find the peace she so desperately sought. The echoes from the basement have faded, but the lessons learned and the bonds strengthened remain, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of love.